The moving truck kicked up dust as it rumbled down the long driveway. Rebecca Chen gripped the steering wheel of her old pickup, following behind with the last of her belongings packed in the bed. At 42 years old, she was starting over. Again. The property stretched out before her, 15 acres of rolling hills and open sky. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. After 2 years of lawyer fees and court dates, after splitting everything down the middle with a man she'd spent 18 years with, this place represented freedom. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. The house itself was modest, a single-story ranch that needed some love. But what had sold her on the property was the barn. It stood about 100 yards from the main house, weathered wood and a slightly sagging roof, but solid. Real solid. The inspector said the bones were good, built sometime in the 1950s by a family that had raised horses here. Rebecca had plans for it. Nothing fancy, just a workshop maybe. Storage for the tractor she'd need to maintain all this land. Possibly some chickens down the road. She parked and stepped out, breathing in the smell of dry grass and distant pine trees. This was Riverside County, far enough from the city to feel like the middle of nowhere, close enough that she could still get to a grocery store without planning an expedition. Perfect. The movers were efficient, and by late afternoon her furniture was scattered through the house in a way that barely resembled organization. She'd deal with it later. Right now she wanted to walk her property, really see what she'd bought. That's when she noticed the black SUV. It was creeping along the road that bordered her land, moving so slowly it was almost stopped. The windows were tinted dark, and though she raised her hand in a friendly wave, the vehicle didn't acknowledge her. Just kept that slow crawl before finally speeding up and disappearing around the bend. Something about it felt off, but Rebecca shook it away. She was probably just being paranoid. New place, new neighbors. People were curious. That's all it was. By evening, she'd managed to unpack her kitchen boxes and make a simple dinner. The sunset through her new living room window was spectacular, painting the hills in shades of orange and gold. She ate standing up at the counter, too tired to care about proper table manners, and felt something close to peace for the first time in months. The next morning, she found the letter. It was tucked into her mailbox, which she hadn't even realized she'd needed to check. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with an embossed return address that read, Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. Rebecca's stomach dropped. An HOA. She'd specifically asked about that when buying the place. The realtor had sworn up and down that while technically the HOA existed, properties on the edge like hers weren't really part of it. Something about being grandfathered in, about how the association had formed years after these outlying parcels were developed. She ripped open the envelope. The letter was formal, cold, and straight to the point. The structure on her property, meaning her barn, was in violation of community standards. It was an eyesore that detracted from property values. She had 30 days to remove it completely, or face fines and potential legal action. Rebecca read it 3 times, her disbelief growing with each pass. Remove the barn? The barn that had been standing there for 70 years? The barn that was one of the main reasons she'd bought this place? She grabbed her stack of closing documents and spread them across her kitchen table. There had to be something in here. She wasn't crazy. The realtor had shown her documentation. It took an hour, but she found it. A letter from the county confirming that her property, along with 4 others in the area, predated the HOA by decades. The barn was specifically mentioned as a historical structure, protected under county preservation guidelines. The HOA had no authority over it. Armed with this information, Rebecca found the phone number at the bottom of the violation letter and dialed. Riverside Estates HOA. This is Gerald speaking. The voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of someone used to being in charge. Hi, my name is Rebecca Chen. I just moved into the property on Old Mill Road and I received a letter about my barn. Ah, yes, Miss Chen. There was no warmth in his voice. I trust you understand the urgency of the situation. That structure is completely unacceptable. Well, I've been looking at my property documents and it appears the barn is actually protected. It predates your HOA and falls under county historical preservation. Silence on the other end. Then, Ms. Chen, I don't know what your realtor told you, but we have standards here in Riverside Estates. That barn is a blight on our community. But legally, Legally, Ms. Chen, you'll find that fighting the HOA is expensive and time-consuming. I've been president of this association for 12 years. I know every lawyer, every county official, every person who matters in this area. I suggest you comply with the notice. It'll be easier for everyone. The condescension in his voice made Rebecca's jaw clench. She'd dealt with men like this before. Men who thought their title or their connections made them untouchable. Men who believed that talking down to people was the same as being right. We'll see about that, Mr. Hutchins. Gerald Hutchins. And yes, Ms. Chen, we will see. The line went dead. Rebecca set her phone down carefully, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. She'd moved here for peace, for a fresh start, for a place where she could finally just breathe. And now this. What Gerald Hutchins didn't know, what nobody in this sleepy county knew yet, was that in exactly 13 days, Rebecca Chen would be sworn in as their new county sheriff. She'd kept it quiet during the move, not wanting the attention, not wanting people to treat her differently before she'd even started the job. She'd spent 20 years in law enforcement, working her way up from patrol officer to detective to finally winning the election for sheriff. She knew the law inside and out, and she knew bullies when she saw them. Rebecca walked to her window and looked out at the barn, solid and sturdy against the darkening sky. That building had weathered storms for 7 decades. It would weather this too, and so would she. The next 2 weeks became a crash course in HOA warfare, and Rebecca was a quick study. Her days were split between preparing for her new job and researching every property law, county ordinance, and HOA regulation she could find. The sheriff's office had given her access to her office early, so she could familiarize herself with the department. But most evenings found her at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and highlighters. The barn wasn't just protected, it was practically bulletproof from a legal standpoint. Built in 1952, it appeared on county records dating back decades before Riverside Estates HOA even existed. More than that, 3 years ago the county had done a survey of historical structures and the barn had been flagged as a potential heritage site. Not official yet, but in the process. Rebecca compiled everything into a folder, made copies, and sent a certified letter to Gerald Hutchins. Professional, polite, thoroughly documented. She even included preliminary architectural plans she'd drawn up showing how she intended to restore the barn to its original condition while maintaining its historical character. She thought that would be the end of it. It was just the beginning. The first new violation notice appeared taped to her front door 3 days later. This one claimed her mailbox was the wrong color. Rebecca looked at the plain black mailbox that had come with the property and shook her head. The notice demanded she paint it community standard beige within 7 days. The next day, another notice. Her fence posts were apparently 6 inches too tall. Never mind that the fence had been there for 40 years. Then another. Her driveway gravel was inconsistent with community aesthetics. Every single day a new notice appeared, each one more ridiculous than the last. Her lawn was too long. Then after she mowed it, the grass was cut too short. The tree near her property line was overhanging into community sight lines. Her truck was parked in a manner inconsistent with residential standards. Rebecca kept every single notice, documenting them with photos and dates. As a law enforcement officer, she knew evidence when she saw it. This was harassment, pure and simple. The certified letter she'd sent came back signed, but Gerald never responded. Not a phone call, not an email, nothing. Just more violation notices, each one threatening fines that started at $500 and escalated from there. Then, the neighbors started acting strange. Rebecca had tried to introduce herself to the people living on the properties closest to hers. The Johnsons, a retired couple half a mile down the road, suddenly wouldn't answer their door even though she could see them peeking through the curtains. The family with kids across the way would grab their children and rush inside whenever they saw her outside. It was the old Vietnamese woman, Mrs. Nguyen, who finally broke the silence. Rebecca had been checking her mail when she noticed the elderly woman working in her garden, 3 houses down. On impulse, she decided to walk over. Mrs. Nguyen looked up nervously as Rebecca approached, her hands clutching her gardening trowel like it might offer protection. "I'm sorry to bother you," Rebecca said, keeping her distance and her voice gentle. "I'm Rebecca from the property with the barn. I just wanted to introduce myself." Mrs. Nguyen glanced around as if checking whether anyone was watching. "You should go," she said quietly. "It's not safe to be seen talking to you." "Not safe? What do you mean?" The old woman hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. She gestured for Rebecca to come closer, into her garden where they'd be less visible from the road. "That man, Gerald Hutchins, he runs the HOA like it's his kingdom," Mrs. Nguyen whispered. "3 families have been forced out in the last 5 years. He finds violations, piles on fines, makes their lives miserable until they sell. Then his friends buy the properties cheap. That's illegal. Legal, illegal, it doesn't matter when he's friends with half the county officials. The mayor, the planning commission, even some people in the sheriff's office. Nobody crosses Gerald Hutchins and stays here long." Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. "The sheriff's office?" "The old sheriff, yes. They played golf together. I don't know about the new one." "Election happened, but I heard the new sheriff hasn't started yet." Mrs. Nguyen looked at Rebecca with sad, knowing eyes. "You seem like a nice woman. I'm sorry about what's happening to you. But my advice? Take whatever they offer for your property and leave. Fighting him only makes it worse." Rebecca thanked her and walked back home, her mind racing. She'd known small-town politics could be messy. But this was something else. This was systematic abuse of power, hidden behind the bland bureaucracy of an HOA. That evening, she drove into town for her official swearing-in ceremony. She'd requested it be low-key, just the county judge and a few necessary witnesses. No press, no fanfare. She wanted to earn respect through her work, not through photo opportunities. Judge Anderson, a stern woman in her 60s, administered the oath in her chambers. "Do you solemnly swear to uphold the laws of this county and state, to serve and protect all citizens with fairness and integrity?" "I do," Rebecca said, her hand on the badge that was now officially hers. "Then congratulations. Sheriff Chen, the county is in good hands." Rebecca wished she felt as confident as the judge sounded. She got home after dark, exhausted and keyed up at the same time. Tomorrow she'd start her first real day as sheriff. Tonight she just wanted to sleep. The envelope in her mailbox changed that plan. This one wasn't cream-colored and formal. It was plain white, and the letter inside was typed in red ink. "Final notice," it screamed at the top. She had 72 hours to remove the barn or the HOA would take all necessary enforcement actions to protect community standards. 72 hours. Rebecca looked at her calendar. That would be Saturday morning. She should have been worried. She should have been scared. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Determination. She'd faced down armed suspects, worked undercover operations, testified against gang members in court. She wasn't about to be intimidated by a bully with a clipboard and an inflated sense of his own importance. Friday passed in a blur of meetings and department introductions. Her new deputies were professional, competent, and clearly sizing her up. She'd expected that. First female sheriff the county had ever had. First Asian American sheriff. She knew she'd have to prove herself. What she didn't expect was the undercurrent of tension she sensed in some of the senior staff. Nothing obvious, nothing she could point to directly. Just a feeling. Looks exchanged. Conversations that stopped when she entered a room. By Friday evening, she was second-guessing herself. Maybe it was just normal new boss anxiety. Maybe she was being paranoid. Saturday morning proved she wasn't paranoid at all. Rebecca woke early like she always did. Coffee first, then she planned to spend the morning working on the barn. She'd bought supplies during the week. New boards to replace the rotted sections, wood preservative, proper tools for restoration work. It was therapeutic working with her hands, creating something solid and real. She was in old jeans and a work shirt, her hair tied back, carrying lumber into the barn when she heard them. Vehicles. Multiple vehicles. Moving fast. Rebecca stepped out of the barn, squinting against the morning sun, and felt her blood run cold. 3 Sheriff's Department SUVs were racing up her driveway, lights flashing. Behind them, an armored vehicle. The SWAT truck. Her hands came up automatically, visible, non-threatening. Training kicked in even as her mind struggled to process what was happening. "I'm Sheriff Rebecca Chen," she shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of the vehicle skidding to a stop. Doors flew open. Officers emerged in full tactical gear, weapons drawn, moving with the choreographed precision of a high-risk operation. These were her deputies. Her people, and they were treating her like a threat. "Hands where we can see them. Step away from the structure," Rebecca kept her hands up, her heart pounding. "I'm Sheriff Chen. This is my property." But they couldn't hear her, or they weren't listening. Everything was happening too fast and too slow at the same time. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of terrible mistake. Then she saw the team leader emerge from the lead vehicle, and her stomach dropped even further. Sergeant Rodriguez. She'd met him just yesterday. Solid officer, 20 years on the force, respected by everyone in the department, and right now he was pointing a weapon at his own sheriff. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. Rebecca stood frozen, hands raised, watching armed officers fan out across her property with the kind of precision that came from serious tactical training. This wasn't a routine call. This was a response to what they believed was a genuine threat. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the structure and move toward me, slowly." Sergeant Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning air, loud and commanding. His weapon was trained on her, but his eyes were scanning everywhere. The barn, the windows of her house, the tree line beyond. "Sergeant Rodriguez, it's me, Sheriff Chen. This is my property." Rebecca kept her voice as steady as she could manage, projecting so he could hear her clearly. "There's been some kind of mistake." She could see the confusion ripple through him. His weapon dipped slightly and he moved closer, other officers maintaining their positions and covering him. "Sheriff Chen." His voice carried disbelief. He'd met her just 2 days ago in full uniform, confident and in command. Now she was in dusty jeans and a faded work shirt, sawdust in her hair, standing in front of a barn like any other rural property owner. "It's me, Mark." She used his first name deliberately, trying to cut through the adrenaline and training to reach the person underneath. "I live here. This is my home." He was close enough now that she could see his face clearly. The color drained from it as recognition fully hit. "Oh God, Sheriff, He immediately lowered his weapon and turned to the other officers. "Stand down. Stand down. It's Sheriff Chen." The change was immediate. Weapons lowered, tactical stances relaxed, and Rebecca could see the horror dawning on face after face as her deputies realized what had just happened. Some of these officers she'd met in the last 2 days. Others she was supposed to meet on Monday. This was not how she'd planned her first real interaction with her team. "Somebody want to tell me what's going on?" Rebecca lowered her hands slowly, trying to project calm even though her heart was still racing. Rodriguez looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. "Sheriff, we received a 911 call about 40 minutes ago. The caller reported an armed individual on this property, claiming they were constructing illegal fortifications, possibly preparing for some kind of standoff situation." "Fortifications?" Rebecca looked back at her barn, at the neat stack of lumber, the basic carpentry tools. "I'm restoring a barn." "We can see that now, ma'am." But the caller was very specific. They said the individual was unstable, potentially dangerous, and that there was an immediate threat to the community. Rodriguez was professional, giving her the facts, but she could hear the anger underneath. Anger at whoever had made this call. Given the nature of the report, SWAT protocol required immediate response. Who made the call? A man named Gerald Hutchins. Said he was president of the local HOA and had been monitoring suspicious activity on this property for several days. Of course it was Gerald. Rebecca felt a cold fury settle over her, the kind that came with absolute clarity. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was dangerous. This was the kind of false report that could get someone killed. "Sergeant, I need to see that 911 recording as soon as possible. In fact, I want every interaction this department has had with Gerald Hutchins pulled, and on my desk first thing Monday morning." "Yes, ma'am." Rodriguez hesitated. "Sheriff, I'm so sorry. If we'd had any idea, you did exactly what you were supposed to do based on the information you received. That's not the problem here." Rebecca looked around at the assembled officers, making eye contact with as many as she could. "The problem is someone weaponized your training and dedication against an innocent person. Against your sheriff, as it turns out, but it could have been anyone. What if I'd panicked? What if I'd reached for something you thought was a weapon?" The silence that followed was heavy. Every officer there knew how quickly situations like this could go wrong. They'd all had the training, seen the videos, maybe even experienced near misses in their own careers. "I'm glad you're all safe. I'm glad I'm safe. But this doesn't end here. We're going to find out exactly what happened and why, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Rebecca softened her tone slightly. For now, why don't you all head back? I'm sure you've got better things to do on a Saturday morning than stand around my barn." The officers dispersed, some of them apologizing as they passed, others too embarrassed to meet her eyes. Rodriguez lingered. "Sheriff, for what it's worth, everyone's been looking forward to working with you. You've got a solid reputation. This is just—" He struggled for words. "A hell of a first impression?" Rebecca managed a small smile. "Yeah, look, Mark, I meant what I said. You and your team did the right thing. But I want to know everything about Gerald Hutchins and his relationship with this department. Everything. You'll have it Monday morning." He paused. "He's connected, Sheriff. The old sheriff, Sheriff Morrison, they were close. Golf buddies. Morrison retired and moved to Florida, but a lot of his people are still here." "Are you one of his people?" Rodriguez met her eyes directly. "I'm a people person, Sheriff. I do my job and I do it right. Politics don't interest me. But you should know that not everyone in the department is going to be happy about you digging into this." "Noted. Thanks for the honesty." After he left, Rebecca stood in her driveway for a long moment watching the dust settle. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "County Records Office, this is Paula speaking." "Hi Paula, this is Sheriff Chen. I need to request some documents under public records law. Everything related to 911 calls made by a Gerald Hutchins over the past 5 years." There was a pause. "Sheriff Chen? I thought you weren't starting until Monday." "I started yesterday, actually. Can you help me with this?" "Of course. Give me until Monday afternoon and I'll have everything pulled together. Should I send it to your office?" "Please, and Paula, discretion would be appreciated." "You got it, Sheriff." The rest of Saturday, Rebecca couldn't focus on the barn. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table and started making notes. Gerald had escalated from harassment to filing a false emergency report. That was a crime, a serious one. But she had to be careful here. If he was as connected as everyone said, going after him directly could blow up in her face. She needed evidence. Lots of it. Undeniable evidence. Sunday morning, she went to church. She wasn't particularly religious, but it seemed like a good way to meet people in the community, without the badge getting in the way. The little Methodist church on the edge of town was half full, mostly older folks and a scattering of families. She sat in the back, trying to be unobtrusive, but small towns being what they were, she drew attention. During the coffee hour after service, several people came up to introduce themselves. "You're the new person who bought the old Henderson place, aren't you?" An elderly man in a suit that had probably fit him better 20 years ago smiled warmly. "Welcome to the community. I'm Pastor Frank, thank you. It's good to be here." Rebecca shook his hand. "I heard there was quite a commotion at your place yesterday morning. Hope everything's all right?" Word traveled fast. "Just a misunderstanding." "Everything's fine. Glad to hear it." Pastor Frank lowered his voice. "Between you and me, if you're having trouble with the HOA, you're not the first. Good people have been driven out. If you need someone to talk to or if the church can help in any way, my door's always open. I appreciate that more than you know." She was heading to her truck when she noticed it. Tucked under her windshield wiper was a folded piece of paper. Rebecca looked around, but the parking lot was filled with people chatting, heading to their cars. Anyone could have left it. She unfolded the paper carefully. It was a printout of a group email, and reading it made her blood boil. "To all Riverside Estates residents," it began. "This is a community alert regarding the new occupant of the property at 1247 Old Mill Road. This individual has been engaging in concerning behavior including unpermitted construction and possible weapons stockpiling. The HOA board is taking all necessary steps to address this threat to our community safety. In the meantime, we advise all residents to avoid contact and report any suspicious activity immediately. We have already filed reports with local authorities and will continue to monitor the situation. Remember, our property values and safety depend on maintaining community standards." It was signed by Gerald Hutchins and dated Friday evening, the day before the SWAT team showed up at her door. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she held the paper. This wasn't just a false police report. Gerald had been poisoning the community against her, priming them to see her as a threat. Mrs. Nguyen's warning came back to her. "It's not safe to be seen talking to you." He'd isolated her before she even had a chance to meet her neighbors. And then he'd called in the cavalry, probably hoping for exactly the kind of disaster that could have happened if things had gone even slightly differently. Rebecca got in her truck and sat there for a moment thinking. Tomorrow she'd be in her office officially, with full access to department resources. She'd start pulling records, building a case. But for now she needed to think strategically. Gerald Hutchins had powerful friends, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated her, assumed she was just another person he could bully and intimidate into submission. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Rebecca Stardy. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made Rebecca feel optimistic. Today, though, she was all business. She arrived at the sheriff's office at 6:30, an hour before most of the staff, and found her desk already piled with files and folders that the night shift had left for her. On top was a yellow sticky note from Rodriguez. Everything I could find on GH. More coming from county records this afternoon. Rebecca made coffee in the break room, noting the suspicious looks from the early arrivals. Word had obviously spread about Saturday's incident. She could either hide from it or address it head-on. She'd never been much for hiding. At the 7:30 shift briefing, she stood in front of 40 deputies and support staff and told them exactly what had happened. Saturday morning, my team responded to what they believed was a credible threat. They did everything right. The problem wasn't the response. The problem was that someone filed a false report, weaponizing your training and dedication to try to intimidate a private citizen. That citizen happened to be me, but it could have been anyone. She paused, letting that sink in. We're going to investigate this thoroughly. Not because I'm the sheriff and I'm angry, though I am, but because filing false emergency reports is a crime that puts everyone at risk. What if there had been a real emergency elsewhere, while 9 of our officers were responding to a fake one? She could see heads nodding. These were good people who took their jobs seriously. The idea that someone had manipulated them didn't sit well. I know some of you have concerns about me being new, about changes I might make. That's fair. But here's what you can count on. I will always have your backs when you do the right thing. And I will always go after people who abuse the system, no matter who they are or who they know. Back in her office, Rebecca opened the file Rodriguez had compiled. Gerald Hutchins had been busy over the years. The 911 call records alone were damning. 23 calls in 5 years, all reporting various suspicious activities or violations in the Riverside Estates area. She cross-referenced the addresses with property records. A pattern emerged that made her stomach turn. Of those 23 calls, 18 had been about properties that were later sold within 6 months of the report. Of those 18, 12 had been purchased by a small real estate investment company called Riverside Holdings LLC. It took Rebecca another hour of digging to find the ownership records for Riverside Holdings. The company had 3 principals. One was Gerald's brother. Another was Gerald's business partner. The third was the nephew of the former sheriff. They'd been running a scam. Use the HOA to harass property owners, file false reports to escalate pressure, then buy up the properties at distressed prices after the owners couldn't take it anymore. All while using police resources as their personal intimidation service. Rebecca sat back in her chair, a cold anger settling in her chest. This was worse than she'd thought. This wasn't just one petty tyrant on a power trip. This was organized, systematic, and it had been protected by her predecessor. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Paula from County Records stood there with a wheeled cart full of boxes. Your request, Sheriff. I pulled everything you asked for, plus some things I thought you might find interesting. Paula glanced behind her and lowered her voice. There's a folder marked Special at the bottom of box 3. You didn't get that from me. What's in it? Complaints. Filed over the years by residents against Gerald Hutchins and the HOA. None of them went anywhere. They were all marked resolved or no action needed and filed away. Paula's expression was carefully neutral. Sheriff Morrison's signature is on most of them. Thank you, Paula, I mean it. After she left, Rebecca spent the next 3 hours going through everything. The picture that emerged was damning. Person after person had tried to fight back against the HOA's overreach. Every single complaint had been dismissed. Some people had tried to escalate to the County Board of Supervisors, but those complaints had mysteriously disappeared from official records. The Johnsons, her neighbors who wouldn't answer the door, had filed a complaint 2 years ago about harassment. It had been marked resolved after they sold their house and moved. The Martinez family, 3 properties over, had documented 18 separate violation notices in a single month, all for trivial issues. Their complaint had been dismissed as frivolous. They'd sold 6 months later. A young couple, named the Patels, had actually tried to sue the HOA. Their lawyer had withdrawn from the case after receiving threats. The Patels had declared bankruptcy and lost their house to foreclosure. Rebecca felt sick. These were real people whose lives had been destroyed while the system that was supposed to protect them had looked the other way, or worse, actively helped their abusers. She was so absorbed in the files that she didn't notice Rodriguez standing in her doorway until he cleared his throat. "Sheriff, you've been at this for hours. It's past 2 o'clock. Rebecca looked up, realizing she'd skipped lunch entirely. "Did you know about any of this?" "Some of it. Rumors, mostly. Morrison ran the department like his personal kingdom. If you weren't in his circle, you kept your head down and did your job." Rodriguez came in and sat down uninvited. "I transferred here from the city 5 years ago, so I was always on the outside. But I heard things. Complaints that disappeared. Calls that got special handling if they involved certain people." "Why didn't you report it?" "To who?" "Internal Affairs reported to Morrison. The county board was full of his golf buddies. I had a wife and 2 kids to feed. I'm not proud of it, Sheriff, but I kept my head down." Rebecca wanted to be angry, but she understood. Whistleblowers rarely came out ahead, especially in small-town politics. "I need your help now. You've got it." "What do you need?" "I want to talk to everyone who filed a complaint against Hutchins or the HOA, the ones who are still in the area anyway. Can you help me track them down?" "Consider it done." Over the next 2 days, Rebecca conducted quiet interviews. She met people in coffee shops and parks, always in plain clothes, always keeping things informal. The stories were heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. Mrs. Nguyen, when Rebecca finally got her to open up, revealed that her husband had died of a heart attack 3 years ago, during a particularly stressful dispute with the HOA over their garden fence. "The doctor said it was stress. Gerald Hutchins killed my husband as surely as if he'd pulled a trigger. A man named Tom Brewster, who'd sold his property and moved into a trailer park on the edge of town, showed her documentation of 47 separate violation notices in 3 months. I owned that land free and clear. Worked my whole life to pay it off. They stole it from me, Sheriff. Legally maybe, but they stole it all the same." By Wednesday afternoon, Rebecca had enough. She called Rodriguez into her office again, along with Lieutenant Helen Park, her second-in-command, and Deputy Chief Mike Wolf, who ran investigations. "We have enough to arrest Gerald Hutchins on charges of filing false police reports. That's just the start. I want a full investigation into Riverside Holdings, into the relationship between Morrison and Hutchins, into every property transaction that followed one of these suspicious calls." "That's going to create waves," Wolf said carefully. "Big ones. Gerald is connected to a lot of powerful people in this county. Good. I hope it creates a tsunami." Rebecca met each of their eyes in turn. "I didn't become a cop to protect powerful people from consequences." "Did you?" Park smiled slightly. "No, ma'am, I did not. When do you want to make the arrest?" Rodriguez asked. "Friday. I want the district attorney's office in the loop first. This needs to be airtight." Rebecca pulled up her calendar. "There's a HOA board meeting Thursday night. I want surveillance on it. I have reason to believe Hutchins is going to use that meeting to continue his campaign of harassment." She was right. Mrs. Nguyen, who'd agreed to help after Rebecca promised her protection, wore a wire to the Thursday night meeting. The recording she brought back was gold. Gerald's voice came through crystal clear. "That woman thinks she can waltz in here and ignore our rules. Well, I've dealt with troublemakers before. A few more police calls, some pressure on her employer, maybe an anonymous tip to the media about safety concerns. She'll crack like all the others." "Are you sure that's wise, Gerald?" Another voice, uncertain. "I heard she's well connected," Gerald laughed. "Connected?" "She's nobody. Divorced, no family in the area, new to the county. Who's going to take her side? I've spent 12 years building relationships with everyone who matters. The mayor, the county commissioners, the business owners. One newcomer isn't going to change anything." The recording went on. Gerald bragged about the SWAT incident, about how he'd taught her a lesson. He outlined plans for additional harassment. He even joked about the families he'd forced out over the years. The Patels tried to fight back, remember? Look how that turned out. Bankruptcy, foreclosure, and we picked up their property for 40 cents on the dollar. This woman will fold just like they did." Rebecca listened to the recording 3 times, her anger growing colder and sharper with each pass. Mrs. Nguyen sat across from her, looking small and tired. "Will this help?" the old woman asked. "This will help a lot. Thank you for being brave enough to do this. I did it for my husband, and for all the others who couldn't fight back.